Now Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord, and smote Job with sore boils from the sole of his foot unto his crown. Then said his friends unto him, Know that God exacteth of thee less than thine iniquity deserveth. And Job answered and said, My flesh is clothed with worms and clods of dust. My skin is broken and become loathsome. But ye are forgers of lies. Ye are all physicians of no value.
Greetings and welcome, fellow investigators.
Where am I? This place is familiar. I've not been here for years.
It's hard to read that as I try to turn my head to actually look at it. It goes off to the side so I can't actually see it. It's like looking... Say, point your head to the footsteps. Don't go to the side. Stay in the centre so I can actually read you. Oh, well, I can't actually read that. Oh, greetings and welcome, fellow investigators, pedestrians. I don't really know what this game's about. I just saw that it was in the store and I thought, wow, let's give it a try. And yes, it's very misty. Let's get on with it. Pity this movement card is a little bit out of hand. If I try to turn to look at it, oh, it's actually... I stand corrected, it was still moving around. So I can't actually read what's on there. So it's just... That's going to get annoying. Yeah, I got... Okay, let's try and see if we can... Continue, save, exit. No options. So it looks like I'm stuck with smooth controller.
There's something written on the door.
Physician.
Let's try the door handle. I don't like locked doors. I need to remember who lived here.
The physician, probably. Of no particular worth. Can't do anything.
My memory's still a bit hazy.
The Berkeley widower.
Can't see anything inside. I think it's a false window. Something to do with symmetry. I'm not climbing through no windows. I'm in enough trouble already.
Oh, I am most wretched when alone, as every surrounding object reminds me of my irreparable loss. But no place on earth would at present suit me but my Berkeley home, and I trust my friends will not endeavour to take me away, for the bitter cup has a kind of relish in it here, which it could afford nowhere else.
Something written on the back of that letter. I remember now. This was the home of that doctor. He was quite notorious in his day.
Oh, because we now know who owns it. The door opens for you.
Soused. It's like being there all those years ago. That letter was written the day before he died. Bit spooky.
My dear Williams, I hereby grant your I can't read it. It keeps on bouncing backwards and forwards. Let me try turning the light on. Sorry, just bear with me 1 sec. Turn the light on. Okay, right. Stop bouncing backwards and forwards. My dear William, I hereby your father that you will be returned in a few days to Bristol. Be assured you... Oh, I can't be bothered to read anything else.
This painting don't belong here. I'd remember an expensive piece like this. It would look more at home inside Berkeley Castle. The Berkeley family crest. Not much use at the moment.
The Chantry.
The Berkeley family crest. Not much use at the moment. It's inscribed with the name Wortley Montague. Heard that name before somewhere. Now, I don't remember there being a Turkish lantern clock in the hallway. This was a doctor's country home. He had a townhouse somewhere in these parts too. Can't remember where, but it'll come back to me.
Gloucestershire. Okay, so I've got to find a sign that's got the name Gloucestershire on it to open the door.
They called this place Chantry Cottage. I don't remember why, but there's been grand buildings around here for centuries.
It was called the Chantry, from having in former times been in the possession of certain monks. It is contiguous to the churchyard of Berkeley Castle, and the tower of St. Mary's Church overhangs the southern boundary of the shrubbery.
That's it. Before King Henry, this place were a home for priests. Priests who spent their days saying prayers for the dead. That portable desk came with me on all my jobs. Can't believe that miserly pawnbroker only gave me a shilling for it. That portable desk came with me on all my jobs. Can't believe that miserly pawnbroker only gave me a shilling for it. The doctor had a lot of paintings, but I never figured out who all the artists were. That's the doctor. His eyes follow you around the room. That's a wine cooler, and he had an impressive collection of wines in his cellar too. I wouldn't have left things this untidy. I still have my professional pride back then. That's one of them Gilray caricatures. I'll come back to it when I've explored a bit more. There's papers everywhere. I'll come back and tidy it later.
Ridicule.
Copy of the local newspaper from September 1784. Might read it later.
Experiments.
More of the doctor's writings. Doesn't seem relevant at the moment. Copy of the local newspaper from September 1784. Might read it later. There's papers everywhere. I'll come back and tidy it later. That's one of them Gilray caricatures. I'll come back to it when I've explored a bit more. This is where the doctor carried out his curious studies. I dread to think what kind of experiments he used to get up to in here.
Oh, Gloucestershire, okay.
This deserves closer inspection.
On Thursday last at 2 o'clock, a balloon was launched from the inner court of Berkeley Castle, which rose to a very great height and was visible for a quarter of an hour. The same afternoon, it was seen to descend in a field in the parish of Kingscote, about 10 miles from Berkeley. The locals were so much terrified that they could not for some time be prevailed upon to approach it.
There's something special about this.
A small quantity of the serum of human blood was poured over about a square foot of grass. 3 sprinklings were given at the distance of a fortnight each, amounting to the serum contained in 40 ounces of blood. The effects it has produced on the vegetation of the grass is astonishing. It is beautifully green and thick and has sprung up several inches, while the surrounding grass has but just begun to shoot and looks of a yellowish green.
The charred remains of a scientific manuscript. Not much use right now. Let me check this.
24th of January, 1823. My dear William, I hear by your father that you will return in a few days to Bristol. Be assured you will take with you my best wishes and affections. I am happy to certify that no boy could behave better than you did during your stay with me at the Chantry. Pursue this line of good conduct, and you will be happy yourself, and make your father and everyone who loves you happy too. Your affectionate uncle, E.J.
Something else may jog my memory further. That portable desk came with me on all my jobs. Can't believe that miserly pawnbroker only gave me a shilling for it. I wouldn't have left things this untidy. I still have my professional pride back then.
Okay, right, fine.
That's a wine cooler, and he had an impressive collection of wines in his cellar too. That's one of them Gilray caricatures. I'll come back to it when I've explored a bit more. I need to remember more before I can go in here.
A fatal temperature. Can't go outside. Aha.
Every object tells a story.
Here we go.
The River Severn cuts through the English county of Gloucestershire, linking Bristol in the south with Gloucester. The Vale of Ark lies on the south bank of the river, between the two cities. I remember now. His second home was in Cheltenham, Gloucester way. Fine townhouse it was too. This was a breakfast room. I always imagined this was a centre of family life in the doctor's home. Home cooked food. Definitely something to come back to later. More comfort than I'm used to, but I can't put my feet up now. By all accounts, the doctor didn't travel much, but he had correspondence from all around the world. Home cooked food. Definitely something to come back to later.
It was the most terrible of the ministers of death, always present, filling the churchyard with corpses, tormenting with constant fears all whom it had not yet stricken.
The condition of a servant would be too severe were they not allowed some time which they may call their own. In all well-governed families, a maid servant has the liberty every Sunday, or every other Sunday, of going to church. If she neglects it, it discovers she has little sense of true religion, and may well be suspected of failing in her duty to an earthly master and mistress, when she fails in that to her Maker.
Apples from the doctor's garden.
Thus our hero, being plundered of his estate and bereaved of his children, says, "Naked came I out of my mother's womb, and naked shall I return thither. The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord."
Let's take a closer look.
It left hideous traces of its power on those whose lives it spared, turning the babe into a changeling, at which the mother shuddered, and making the eyes and cheeks of the big-hearted maiden objects of horror to the lover.
Family grave. Scared composer.
What have we got? Beethoven and Mozart survived the smallpox with just a few scars, but many that survived it ended up blind as well. Beethoven and Mozart survived the smallpox with just a few scars, but many that survived it.
At length the infection spread to the palace, and reached the young and blooming queen. She received the intimation of her danger with true greatness of soul. She gave orders that every servant who had not had the smallpox should instantly leave Kensington House, and then calmly awaited her fate.
Alright, I think I know how to open that one.
Lord Dalkeith has been dead of the smallpox for just 3 days. It is so dreadful in his family. His eldest boy died of it last year, and his only brother, who was ill but 2 days, putrefied so fast that his limbs fell off as they lifted him into the coffin.
This deserves close.
Were your interviews for a new housemaid fruitful, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, madam. Both girls were hard-working and from respectable families, but only the Jones girl has had the pox, and plenty of scars to prove it.
Then you must select her. I will not risk the health of my family.
Pox scarring could often be a path into service. If you were lucky enough to survive the speckled monster, then you couldn't catch it again.
Family grave.
Looks like the key to a desk drawer.
Lord Dalkeith has been dead of the smallpox for just 3 days. It is so dreadful in his family. His eldest boy died of it last year, and his only brother, who was ill but 2 days, putrefied so fast that his limbs fell off as they lifted him into the coffin.
There's something special about this. 6 children from the same family lost to the smallpox. Not every family was as unlucky as these poor souls. 1 in 5 of those who caught it wouldn't live to tell the tale. Unfortunately, not everyone who survived the smallpox could live with the terrible scars it left behind. Sadly, some even took their own lives. Smallpox was a cruel, hideous disease. It's no wonder they call it the Angel of Death. Something's changed. I'm sure those stairs were blocked a minute ago.
Oh, there's that.
The charred remains of a scientific manuscript. Not much use right now. Ah, there's papers everywhere. I'll come back and tidy it later.
On Thursday last at 2 o'clock, a balloon was launched from the inner court of Berkeley Castle, which...
A small quantity of the serum of human blood was poured over about a square foot of grass. 3 sprinklings were given at the distance of a fortnight each, amounting to the serum contained in 40 ounces of blood. The effects it has produced on the vegetation of the grass is astonishing. It is beautifully green and thick and has sprung up several inches, while the surrounding grass has but just begun to shoot and looks of a yellowish green.
This also gives us to consider that diseases are not only judiciously inflicted for past offences, but graciously also designed to prevent future. A little recollection will tell a man whether he has not often been kept virtuous through fear of the consequences, even when inclination has gotten the better of his duty.
His eldest son had a feeble constitution and other infirmities which rendered it inexpedient to send him to a public school. A domestic tutor was procured who was little older than his pupil, but though tender in years, he was old in wisdom and knowledge.
Master Walker must have been a bright spark, though.
His eldest son had a feeble constitution and other infirmities which rendered it inexpedient to send him to a public school. A domestic tutor was procured who was little older than his pupil, but though tender in years, he was old in wisdom and knowledge.
Small cupboard, but probably bigger than my cell. That's just a cupboard. There's no way through here.
He was lying in the last stage of pulmonary consumption. He had repeated hemorrhages from the lungs, and was then evidently approaching his end. I was introduced into the sick room, and there for the first time I saw Mrs. Jenner, the anxious and constant attendant of her dying child.
I feel greatly obliged to everyone who attempts to console me in my present affliction. But you, who know so much of the human mind, are convinced how vain are these friendly efforts. I had no conception till it happened that the gash would have been so deep, but God's will be done. Selected poems by the late John Dawes Worgan of Bristol, who died on the 25th of July 1809, aged 19 years.
Nice landscape. Nice landscape.
He met with many discouragements, his notions having been treated with scorn and ridicule by some, and with indifference by almost all.
There was plenty of paperwork in the dining room I could look through. Let me check.
There nibbling at thistles stand Jim, Joe and Mary. On their foreheads, oh horrible, crumpled horns bud. They're Tom with a tail and...
I have entrusted a most important matter to you, which I firmly believe will prove of essential benefit to the human race. I should not wish what I have stated to be brought into conversation, for should anything
So your book is out at last. Well, I can tell you that there bean't a copy sold in our town, nor shan't neither, if I can help it.
He must have believed in something to have resisted so much scorn. This was the doctor's dressing room. Looks more like a laboratory.
Smoking, I am sure, is harmless if used in moderation. A man who has a pipe at his command always has a soothing companion, independently of its salutary influence on good health.
I can't afford to smoke no more, but I reckon I feel better for stopping. Never seen one of them before. It's got a face like a timepiece.
Barometer. I had one of those.
What have we got here then?
I opened the thorax of the dog between two ribs and introduced the thermometer. Then I put some lint into the wound to keep it from healing, so that the thorax might inflame. But before I had time to try it again, from the hurry of business, my dog died. If these experiments will amuse you, I should be glad that they were made. But take care you do not break your thermometer in the dog's chest. John Hunter.
This deserves closer inspection.
I selected a healthy boy, about 8 years old, for the purpose of inoculation for the cowpox. The matter was taken from a sore on the hand of a dairymaid who was infected by her master's cows. It was inserted on the 14th of May, 1796, into the arm of the boy by means of 2 superficial incisions, barely penetrating the cutis, each about half an inch long.
What was the experiment?
The doctor's experiment scared a lot of people. But there is something pretty unnatural about it all.
The library.
There's something special about this.
The ring.
Mr. Jenner, after the most advantageous and well-attested success of the vaccine in England, I hastened to imitate this example by introducing it into the pious establishments under my direction. I am pleased to report its success and show my gratitude to one who has provided this service to humanity. The motive engages me to offer you the attached ring as a testimony of the sentiments of esteem and goodwill with which I am most affectionate. Marie.
Marie Curie.
William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox.
Oops.
The doctor's previous education nor his habits gave him a relish of any of the branches of pure science. He seemed to have a peculiar horror of arithmetical questions, and he exclaimed that he would rather look for an hour at a mite through a microscope than have his time taken up with such things.
William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox. William and Mary. She's the queen that died of smallpox. The doctor's library. Dr. Edward Jenner, that was his name. I still don't understand why someone would deliberately give cowpox to a healthy boy.
Phipps went through the cowpox apparently in a regular and satisfactory manner, but the most agitating part of the trial still remained to be performed. It was needful to ascertain whether he was secure from the contagion of smallpox.
Let me check this over.
Are you in good health, James? It's been 8 weeks now since you received the cowpox.
Yes, sir.
So now we must discover if you are secure from the contagion of smallpox. We will use the lancet like before. Are you ready?
Phipps went through the cowpox apparently in a regular and satisfactory manner, but the most agitating part of the trial still remained to be performed. It was needful to ascertain whether he was secure from the contagion of smallpox.
Jenner was a student of Hunter's for his medical training in London. Clearly they became great friends. Every object tells a story.
Sarah Nelms, a dairy maid at a farmer's near this place, was infected with the cowpox from her master's cows in May 1796. A large pustulous sore and the usual symptoms accompanying the disease were produced in consequence.
Edward Jenner and his parliamentary friends seeing off the anti-vaccinationists. Something to do with the migration of birds. Not relevant now. Edward Jenner, physician, scientist and fellow of the Royal Society. Albie Soust, the freedom of the City of London.
He contrived in a short time to accumulate a series of specimens illustrative of comparative anatomy and natural history, which would have formed a museum of no. His attention was drawn forcibly to the nature of cowpox while Jenner was yet a youth. A young countrywoman came to seek advice, and the subject of smallpox was mentioned in her presence. She immediately observed, "I cannot take that disease, for I have had cowpox."
If cowpox wouldn't kill you, and it stopped the speckled monster, then it was worth catching it on purpose. But I don't much fancy being given the smallpox afterwards.
Towards the southern extremity of the lawn, and shaded by the thick screen of evergreens, is a small rustic apartment. Here, in the summer mornings, Jenner used to receive his poor neighbours who came for the purpose of vaccination. In this humble fane more wonders were wrought than in all the splendid temples of Asclepius.
The house feels different now. Perhaps I should look upstairs.
Before I have 2 more letters for the globe.
What with him spending all that time around smallpox, I wonder why he didn't catch it himself. Something has changed again. Dr. Jenner lived through the wars against revolutionary France and Napoleon, but I don't know what role he played. This was Captain Jenner's room, Edward's youngest son. What have we got here then?
The alternative presented by the French government to His Majesty, in language the most peremptory and menacing, was the evacuation of Malta, or the renewal of war. His Majesty is actuated solely by a sense of what is due to the honour of his crown, and the interests of his people, and by an anxious... At the end of 1809, Napoleon issued a decree that 100,000 francs should be at the disposal of the Minister of the Interior for encouraging and propagating vaccination. Dr. Wickham, who was one of the travelling fellows of the University of Oxford, was in Paris when the command for the detention of the English was issued. The committee recommended that Dr. Jenner should immediately avail himself of his great...
Sire, having made a discovery of which all nations acknowledge the beneficial effects, I presume with great deference to request a favour from your Imperial Majesty. My humble request is to permit 2 of my friends, both men of science and literature, to return to England. One, Mr. William Thomas Williams, residing at Nancy. The other, Dr. Wickham, at present at Geneva. I have the honour to be...
At 8 years of age, Dr. Jenner was put under a preparatory process for inoculation with the smallpox. This preparation lasted 6 weeks. He was bled to ascertain whether his blood was fine and purged repeatedly until he became emaciated and feeble. After this barbarism of human...
The smallpox, so fatal amongst us, was here entirely harmless by the invention of engrafting. The old woman comes with a nutshell full of smallpox, rips open a vein with a large needle, and puts into it as much matter as can lie upon the head of her needle. On the 8th day the fever begins to seize them, and they keep their beds 2 days, very seldom.
I have since met with a considerable number of these Africans, who all agree in one story. People take the juice of smallpox, cut their skin, and put in a drop. They get a little sick, but nobody dies of it.
The Reverend Cotton Mather.
Inoculation.
This preacher died 100 years ago, then. What have we got here, then?
Let the atheist, then, and the scoffer, the heathen and unbeliever, disclaim a dependence upon providence, dispute the wisdom of God's government, and deny obedience to his laws. Let them inoculate and be inoculated, whose hope is only in and for this life.
To the memory of the Right Honourable Lady Mary Wortley Montagu, who in the year 1720 introduced inoculation of the smallpox into England from Turkey.
The condition of a servant would be too severe were they not allowed some time which they may call their own. In all well-governed families, a maid servant has the liberty every Sunday, or every other Sunday, of going to church. If she neglects it, it discovers she has little sense of true religion, and may well be suspected of failing in her duty to an earthly master and mistress, when she fails in that to her Maker.
The doctor's bedroom, where he finally passed from this world.
He was below the middle stature, his hair dark, and a little inclining to curl, and it was observed at his death that he was not the least grey. He was rather nearsighted, but never made use of glasses. His dress was black, a large collar to the coat, and loose, low trousers. The dress of the day.
Both his wife and son were taken by consumption. After all he did for medicine, that must have been hard to cope with. Probably some sort of bird you'd see down on the Severn Estuary.
Mrs. Jenner's health became evidently more impaired. She was so slender, so attenuated, and so much deprived of all vigour of constitution by protracted illness. I visited her in Cheltenham the night before she expired, and when she was in full expectation of the fatal event, she had long been preparing for her final account.
I avail myself of this occasion to render you my portion of the tribute of gratitude due to you from the whole human family. Medicine has never before produced any single improvement of such utility. You have erased from the calendar of human afflictions one of its greatest. Yours is the comfortable reflection that mankind can never forget that you have lived. Future nations will know by history only that the loathsome smallpox has existed and by you has been exterminated. Accept the most fervent wishes for your health and happiness, and assurances of the greatest respect and consideration.
Legacy.
Thomas Jefferson.
Jenner certainly had friends in high places.
Legacy.
Might look at it later. This thing keeps turning up. Probably important later.
Can't tell what that is. It's not working.
Something has changed again.
Oh, let's go downstairs.
In 1978, Janet Parker became the last recorded victim of smallpox in a laboratory accident at the University of Birmingham in the UK. The virus is thought to have escaped through a ventilation shaft in the medical school where Mrs. Parker worked in the photographic department. Birmingham was braced for a catastrophic smallpox epidemic. But mercifully, she was the only person to die of smallpox in the outbreak.
Another cupboard. I'll have to try a different way. Small cupboard, but probably bigger than my cell. Vaccination wasn't Jenner's only legacy, but I forget what else he got up to. Looks like the French had their own issues with Jenner's vaccine.
He contrived in a short time to accumulate a series of specimens illustrative of comparative anatomy and natural history, which would have formed a museum of no inconsiderable magnitude. Phipps went through the cowpox apparently in a regular and satisfactory manner, but the most agitating part of the trial still remained to be performed. It was needful to ascertain whether he was secure from the contagion.
Dr. Jenner's discovery is unquestionably the greatest discovery ever made for the preservation of the human species. It is proved that in these
It was his intention that it should have first appeared before the public in the Transactions of the Royal Society. When the subject was laid before the President, Jenner was given to understand that he should be cautious and prudent, and ought not to risk his reputation by presenting to the learned body anything which appeared.
I avail myself of this occasion to render you my portion of the tribute of gratitude due to you from the whole human family. Medicine has never before produced any single improvement of such utility. You have erased from the calendar of human afflictions one of its greatest. Yours is the comfortable reflection that mankind can never forget that you have lived. Future nations will know by history only that the loathsome smallpox has existed and by you has been exterminated. Accept the most fervent wishes for your health and happiness, and assurances of the greatest respect and consideration. Thomas Jefferson.
Dear Jenner, your paper on the cuckoo has been read, passed the council, and is in print in the Philosophical Transactions. I spoke to Sir Joseph Banks about your wish to be a Fellow of the Royal Society. Sir Joseph has not the least objection, and will give us all his assistance. But he thinks the paper...
Dr. Wickham, who was one of the travelling...
Sire, having made a discovery of which all nations acknowledge the beneficial effects, I presume with great deference to request a favour from your Imperial...
The alternative presented by the French government to His Majesty in language the most... At the end of 1809, Napoleon issued a decree that 100,000 francs should be at the disposal of the Minister of the Interior for encouraging and propagating vaccination throughout the Empire.
Certain classes are less liable than others to consumption, either because the exhalation to which they are exposed preserve the lungs in a healthy state, or because they acquire from their mode of life a habit susceptible of the complaint.
I feel greatly obliged to everyone who attempts to console me in my present affliction. But you, who know so much of the human mind, are convinced how vain are these friendly efforts. I had no conception, till it happened, that the gash would have been so deep. But God's will be done.
His eldest son had a feeble constitution and other infirmities which rendered it inexpedient to send him to a public school. A domestic tutor was procured who was little older than him.
The smallpox, so fatal amongst us, is here entirely harmless by the invention of
I have since met with a considerable number of these Africans who all agree in one story. People take the juice of...
Let the atheist then, and the scoffer, the heathen and unbeliever, disclaim a dependence upon Providence, dispute the wisdom of God's government, and deny obedience to his laws. Let them inoculate and be inoculated.
It left hideous traces of its power on those whose lives it spared.
6 children from the same family lost to the smallpox. Not every family was as unlucky as these poor souls, but 1 in 5 of those who caught it wouldn't live to tell the tale.
The condition of a servant would be too severe were they not allowed some time.
Were your interviews for a new housemaid fruitful, Mrs. Knight?
Yes, madam. Both girls were hard-working and from respectable families, but only the Jones girl has had the pox, and plenty of scars to prove it.
Then you must select her. I will not risk the health of my family.
My memory's still a bit hazy.
24th of January,
The River Severn cuts through the English county of Gloucestershire, linking Bristol in the south with Gloucester. The Vale of Berkeley lies on the south bank of the river.
There nibbling at thistles stand Jim, Joe and Mary. On their foreheads, oh horrible crumpled horn.
So your book is out at last. Well, I can tell you that there bean't a copy sold in our town, nor shan't neither.
a small quantity of the serum of human blood.
On Thursday last at 2 o'clock, a balloon was launched from the inner court of Berkeley Castle, which rose to a very great height and was visible for a quarter of an hour. The same afternoon, It was seen to descend in a field in the parish of Kingscote, about 10 miles from Barclay. The locals were so much terrified that they could not for some time be prevailed upon to approach it.
Looks like the French had their own issues with Jenner's vaccine.
Phipps went through the cowpox up.
Are you in good health, James? It's been 8 weeks now since you received the cowpox.
Yes, sir.
So now we must discover Sarah Nelms, a dairy maid at a farmer's near this place, was infected with the cowpox from her master's cows in May 1796.
The observation of the migration of birds were read before the Royal Society on November 27th in the year Jenner passed away. They were presented to Sir Humphrey Davy by the Reverend G.C. Jenner, who had the peculiar happiness to accompany his uncle in most of the investigations of the phenomena of migration.
Jenner was first made a Fellow of the Royal Society for his work on cuckoos, but they refused to print his smallpox research because it was too controversial. But his achievements were eventually recognised by Parliament itself with 2 huge grants. I could do with one of those. The drawing room was where the doctor would entertain his guests.
So felt the towering soul of Montague, her sex's glory and her country's too, who gave the spotted...
He was dining with a party at Bath when a question arose whether the temperature was highest in the centre of a candle flame or at some small distance from its apex. Jenner, with his usual ingenuity and readiness, soon settled the dispute. He placed the candle before him, inserting his finger into the middle of the flame. He retained it in this situation for a short time. He then placed it a little above the flame, but was compelled immediately to withdraw it. "There, gentlemen," he observed.
Yeah.
"The question is settled."
I agree. Why does everyone keep saying that the centre of the flame is the hottest when it's in fact the top because the heat rises? I totally agree. I'm one of those that says that the heat of the flame is right at the top. Sorry. Little sign that we've been worried.
He could also play on the violin and flute, and he was in the habit of forming musical parties. I have seen him in his later years, after his renown had filled the world, and many cares had weighed heavy upon him, shake them entirely off and take up a humorous strain as he sang one of his own ballads with all the mirth and gaiety of his youthful days.
Not the greatest painting, must have had some sentimental value. I think that was his brother, or maybe his father. A beautiful countryside scene. I think I should have liked to have met the doctor. He seemed like a decent sort.
Within this tomb hath found a resting place the great physician of the human race, immortal Jenner, whose gigantic mind brought life and health to more than half mankind. Let rescued infancy his word proclaim, and lisp out blessings on his honoured name, and radiant beauty drop one grateful tear, for beauty's truest friend lies buried here.
On the 8th of May 1980, the World Health Organization issued a declaration that smallpox had finally been eradicated throughout the world. Since that day, not a single case has been recorded, and future nations will know by history only that the loathsome smallpox has existed.
Let's have a quick look at the museum, see what there's the museum. I think basically the museum is just everything co-open. Free.
River Severn cuts through the English.
24th of January, 1823. My dear William, I hear by your father that you will return in a few days to Bristol. Be assured you will take with you my best wishes and affections. I am happy to certify that no boy could behave better than you did during your stay with me at the Chantry. Pursue this line of good conduct, and you will be happy yourself, and make your father and everyone who loves you happy too. Your affectionate uncle, E.J.
Yeah, just a little wander around.
He was lying in the last stage of pulmonary consumption. He had repeated hemorrhages from the lungs, and was then evidently approaching his end. I was introduced into the sick room, and there for the first time I saw Mrs. Jenner, the anxious and constant attendant of her dying child.
Okay. Let's see what... Nope, wrong button. Exit. Okay, I'm going to call it quits at that, because that, I believe, is that. Yeah, this is not a game. This is not really an experience. I can say this is more of a documentary, as it describes the as it describes how smallpox was fought against during its time in whatever time period this was. Yeah, I'm sorry, I really didn't get any proper time period or meaning. To be perfectly honest, I was trying to just get through this as fast as possible, so I wasn't really paying too much attention. So I do apologise about that. But yeah, don't get this thinking it's a game or walking simulator or even an experience. It's not. It's none of those things. This is purely a documentary about how one physician tried to, or not tried, actually did fight the smallpox and cowpox disease and all that, and basically went down in history as a physician of unremarkable consequence. But yeah, I think we all owe him a lot of our lives, considering that it's eradicated smallpox today. Well, I wouldn't say eradicated, they still keep some vials of it hidden somewhere in some deep bunker somewhere, because hey, to totally kill it off is genocide, and no one wants that title. Okay, but yeah, thanks very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed watching this as much as I've enjoyed playing this. This week has been a fairly decent week. I mean, we've had quite a lot going on this week. We have had Unearthing Mars 2, so we had a little playthrough of that halfway through. Until, I met a boss I couldn't defeat, but I will try and see if I can defeat him later. We have seen PSVR's first MOBA release in Dark Eclipse, and so I'm going to be giving the review of that in this weekend's weekly update. And yet next week we've still got a few other things that we're going into. Next week, look out, I'm going to be doing Transcendence and also the museum next week. And also, we're almost getting close to that 200 subscriber subscription. almost getting close to that 200 subscriber mark. So I am working tirelessly to try and see if I can make that animation in time. So don't forget, I'm in a race with you guys. See if you can get me to 200 subscribers before I can actually complete that animation for you guys. So, thanks very much for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe. And I'll see you guys out there.